Hello, a little bit of change of scenery today. I'm sitting in my backyard and I'll show you the cherry trees that I'm sitting under. They're in full bloom. We should have a nice crop of Bing cherries here in a few weeks. But I wanted to visit with you today about something that I thought about the last video. We talked about the young man in Kalispell, Montana, and him getting his horse ready to compete. And I've had a lot of students over the years that have come to Kamari and me and said, we want to ride in the Olympics. We know that you were asked to ride with the Olympic team years ago, and how do we get there? Well, my answer to most of them is that you may have the talent to get there, but talent won't get you there. You've got to have a horse to get you there, and to do that, it takes a lot of money. I used to tell them that I thought I could get them a chance to ride with a team, but it would take a couple of $1 million to do it. And I know that sounds extravagant to some of you, but the price of horses, particularly in today's market, has just skyrocketed. One of the top 3 horses in dressage in the United States sold recently. When I say recently, 3 years ago. And the report was that a 9-year-old gelding brought $10.5 million. It takes a certain amount of money to buy a quality horse. Any horse that can compete internationally at this point goes for a price tag well into 6 figures. And so it makes it very difficult for even someone with an awful lot of talent to make it to that. But one of the things that I wanted to point out here was that if you look at the human Olympic athletes, almost without exception, they have had to pay a huge price in order to be there. For one, it has to be a consuming desire. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years in order to get ready. And the other quality that I'd like to talk about in horses today is that being willing to survive the pain that comes with being at that level of competition. When you take a horse and that is going to be a Grand Prix jumping horse, they wind up with a lot of pain because they are going to hit some jumps on occasion, and that hurts. And sometimes you strain muscles, and that hurts. I remember a number of years ago that I tried out a horse that a student had brought to me that they had bought. Nice looking thoroughbred horse. But one of the ways I test a horse for a jumper is I put him on the end of a lunge line. Some of you Western people call that a jip line. And I have him going in a circle around me. And I build a jump, and I get the horse to going over a small jump and gradually increase it in size. If I'm really going to test the horse, I increase it to size where he does knock it down. Whether that's at 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 feet. When they knock it down, you set it at the same height and you bring them back to it without urging them forward, just letting them make the decision. If they come down and just give it more air and jump higher, more carefully, then they're going to make an open jumper. If they come down and say, not me, I'm not going to do that again where it hurts, they then will back off. And they're not going to make that horse that is willing to survive a little pain and go ahead and work. Every horse that I've had that got to an international level was willing to do that. I was in Europe buying horses several years ago, and the Italian Olympic team was there buying horses, and we happened to be at the same place, and I watched them take a 3-year-old that had not been ridden, and they put him on the lunge line and started going take him around, and they had built this little jump out there for him, and they kept getting the jump bigger and bigger and bigger. Now the jump consisted of a pole laying on the ground, and the front pole being at 5 feet in height, and the back pole at 5'4" in height, set about 5.5, 6 feet apart. And this 3-year-old that they were trying out just kept coming down there and would just get right and jump it, and he would get himself right. A horse is not dumb. They don't run in under a fence. And I mean, they learn to look at it and take their best chance at jumping it. Anyway, when they finished, now you have to remember this was almost 40 years ago. I watched them pay 30,000 pounds for a 3-year-old that had never been ridden. And I asked Diageo after they purchased that, I said, I know you're spending government money, but I said, how can you justify paying that much for an untested, untried horse? And I said, you know, he's never been ridden. And he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. He said, let me ask you a question. He says, can you take that horse and break him to ride? Yes, I said. He says, can you teach him to turn and go and do what you want him to do? Yes, I said. He said, can you teach him to jump like we've been watching him jump? And I saw his point. And that was the day that I learned how to test a horse for using, for open jumping. Well, you know, some of the horses I've had, Assassin being one, Smoky being one, that would live with pain. Now, Smoky, you remember, I had him before I met Camary, before I ever started jumping. He was my cow horse. And I had bought him and broken him and trained him, and just a really good using horse. And he really liked to jump. Well, the story I'm going to tell you then took place after we had been showing him for a couple of years. I took him to Ponca City to a horse show. And out on the hunt field, the second fence was a bunch of cedar brush that they had piled up, and it had gotten old and brittle. It still made a fairly attractive jump. And Smoky always jumped close. He didn't jump high over jumps. He skimmed over them, and that's what makes a nice hunter. Because you judge a hunter on their looks, on their style of jumping, and how they approach it. It's not just whether they make it over or not, but it's how pretty they make it over is one of the criteria. Anyway, the second fence of this course was this cedar pile, and as Smokey and I went over it, I felt him flinch, and I heard a pop. I knew he had hit a little piece of brush. In a hunter, that's not a bad thing. I mean, that doesn't count against you as long as you don't knock a fence down. And so we completed the course, and I could tell by the way he was riding under me that he was not happy. He was doing everything right. Completed the course, and when I told him he could quit after the last jump, he didn't put his right front foot to the ground again. I got off of him right there, and he went back to the barn on 3 legs. And I looked at the foot, and you could see a little tiny drop of blood that had run down the hoof, but you couldn't see anything. The hair around the coronary band was fine. I figured that he had hit it hard enough that he had broken the coffin bone in his foot. He was called back in first place, but he couldn't go because he couldn't. You get called back, and in hunter, you have to be sound. The horse has to be sound. And so they call them back and they trot them and make sure they're sound. Well, he couldn't do that. So I put him in the trailer and I hauled him home, took him to our vet. We took an x-ray of the foot. And what we found was that one of those little cedar limbs, a little bit smaller than the point of your little finger, it was about 3/8 of an inch in diameter and 3/4 of an inch long, had gone in his foot at the coronary band, had gone down into the foot, hit the coffin bone, and it broke off underneath the hair on top. So you could see the little point where it had gone in, but it was closed over with with flesh. Anyway, when we x-rayed it, we found this throb that went in the top of his foot down to the coronary band, or down to the coffin bone. We took pliers and got a hold of it, opened it up, and pulled it out, and he was fine. It didn't cause any great trauma either way. We flushed it out with penicillin, but it was a fine to have that wound. I mean, he was over it as soon as we got the stop out. But the point is he was willing to suffer pain to do what I wanted to do. And every horse that I've had that could perform at a high level do that. Racehorses do that. Your great racehorses are willing to run with something hurting. The ones that quit are the ones that don't have the heart to go on. The same is true of people. And those who are committed to becoming great athletes push themselves to the point that, generally speaking, they have some kind of aches and pains that happen. And because of that, because they're willing to suffer that and go on and push through, they become competitors at an international level. Horses as well. Have a wonderful afternoon. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.